He thought he would be rich, but he ended up with an Apache slave and a village willing to kill him. John Parker had always been a man with big dreams. From the moment he was old enough to understand the world around him, he felt that his life was meant for something greater than the small town where he was born. He grew up in a modest home, with wooden floors that creaked and a small garden his mother tended carefully. Life in the town was simple. People knew each other by name and news traveled fast, but wealth and opportunity were almost non-existent. While other boys were content to follow in their father's footsteps, John wanted more. He wanted freedom, adventure, and, above all, wealth. Since childhood, he had been fascinated by stories of the wild frontier, tales of gold hidden in faraway lands, and the mysterious villages of native tribes that outsiders rarely visited. He would sit by the fire on cold evenings, listening to travelers and peddlers speak of fortunes waiting for those brave enough to claim them. Every story painted a picture of a life that was exciting, dangerous, and full of rewards. To John, the idea of working a simple farm or following a routine life seemed unbearable. He wanted more than survival. He wanted success that would make people remember his name. As he grew older, John's ambition only became stronger. He worked odd jobs, saving every penny he could. But no matter how much he saved, the town felt too small, too limited. He read maps and books about distant territories, imagining himself riding across rivers and mountains, discovering wealth hidden in the uncharted wilderness. One day, a traveling trader came to town. He spoke of a remote Apache village that supposedly had treasures beyond imagination. Gold, precious stones, and artifacts, hidden away in a place few outsiders had ever reached. John's heart raced as he listened, and that night he could barely sleep. The idea of the treasure consumed him. It became the vision he could not escape. John decided he could no longer wait. He spent weeks preparing for the journey. He bought supplies, tools, ropes, blankets, and food that could last him for weeks. He studied the map carefully, trying to memorize the river crossings, hills, and forests he would encounter. But preparation was only part of the plan. He needed to convince himself that he was ready for the unknown dangers of the frontier. The wilderness could be cruel, and the stories of hostile encounters were not exaggerated. Many travelers never returned, either lost to the elements, captured, or worse. Still, John's desire for wealth outweighed fear. The dream of riches blinded him to the risks. Before leaving, he tried to explain his plan to his family. His father shook his head, worried and tired, trying to make John see reason. "Son," he said, "there are things out there no one should touch. You could get hurt, or worse. Wealth isn't worth your life." But John could not listen. His mother cried quietly, her hands trembling as she handed him a small bundle of food for the journey. "Be careful," she whispered. "Remember, some things are more valuable than gold." John nodded, not fully understanding her words at the time. He was too focused on the promise of treasure and adventure. When the morning finally came, John left the town quietly, carrying only what he thought was necessary. As he walked along the dusty roads and through the edge of the forests, he felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. Each step took him further from the familiar and deeper into the unknown. The sun was warm on his back, and the wind carried the scents of wildflowers and pine. Birds sang in the trees, and for a moment he felt free in a way he never had before. He imagined the treasure waiting at the end of the journey. He imagined the moment he would finally hold gold in his hands and be admired by everyone who had ever doubted him. The first few days of the journey were not difficult. The landscape was beautiful, and John enjoyed the challenge of walking long distances and learning to navigate by the sun and stars. But soon, reality began to settle in. Rivers were harder to cross than he expected. He had to find safe spots to drink and refill his water, and some paths led him into thick forests where it was easy to get lost. Nights were cold, and John had to sleep under the stars, listening to the sounds of wild animals and the wind rustling through the trees. He began to understand that the frontier was not a playground for dreams, it was a test of survival. Despite the hardships, John's determination never wavered. Every time he grew tired or scared, he reminded himself why he was there. He thought about the riches, the adventure, and the recognition he would receive. He imagined walking into the village of his hometown as a hero, showing everyone what he had achieved. The thought of turning back never lasted long. He pushed through pain, hunger, and exhaustion. He believed that fortune favored the brave, and he wanted to prove he was braver than anyone else. After nearly a week of travel, John began to notice signs that he was nearing the territory he had read about. Broken branches, footprints, and strange patterns in the dirt suggested that he was not alone. His heart raced with anticipation. He imagined the moment he would reach the hidden village and meet the people who held the secrets to unimaginable wealth. At the same time, a small voice of caution whispered in his mind, reminding him of the danger. But he quickly silenced it, telling himself that fortune required courage and courage required risk. As he approached the outskirts of the village, the first real challenge appeared. The land grew wilder and more difficult to navigate. The air felt tense, as if warning him that he was entering a place where he did not belong. John noticed unusual marks on trees and stones, which he had learned from his books were often signs of territorial boundaries. He paused, feeling a mix of fear and excitement. This was it, the moment where his dream and reality would collide. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, confident that he could handle whatever lay ahead. Little did John know that the village he approached was unlike anything he had imagined. The people were not waiting to welcome him with riches. They were cautious, protective, and ready to defend their home. His every move would be watched, and every mistake could cost him dearly. The treasure he sought might exist, but it was hidden behind layers of danger and a culture that valued honor and survival above all else. John's journey, which had begun as a dream of wealth and glory, was about to turn into a test of courage, intelligence, and humility unlike anything he had ever faced. Even as he took his first steps closer to the village, John's mind raced with possibilities. He thought about negotiating for treasure, showing bravery to earn respect, or even outsmarting the people if necessary. The stories he had heard as a child did not prepare him for the complexity of real life among the Apache. What he saw in books and heard from travelers was only a small fraction of the reality he was now stepping into. The forest around him seemed to close in, and the path forward was uncertain, but John's determination remained firm. He believed that anyone who truly wanted wealth had to take risks that others would never dare. And so, with a mixture of fear, excitement, and stubborn determination, John Parker entered the unknown. He had left behind the safety of his town, his family, and his former life. Ahead of him lay challenges he could not yet imagine, and opportunities that might be far different from the gold and riches he had envisioned. The dream of wealth that had guided him for so long was now just one step away from becoming a harsh reality. As the sun set behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the forest, John walked forward, unaware that his adventure was about to change him in ways he could never have expected. John Parker's journey through the wilderness had been long and exhausting, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality of the Apache village he now approached. After days of walking through dense forests, crossing rivers, and climbing hills, he finally saw the first signs of human life, a small clearing with smoke rising from simple huts made of wood and clay. His heart raced with anticipation. This was the moment he had imagined countless times, the moment when he would discover treasure, prove his courage, and claim the wealth he had always dreamed of. As John moved closer, he tried to remember everything he had read about the Apache. They were a proud and protective people, known for their skills in survival and warfare. They had a reputation for being fierce with outsiders, and stories told by travelers were filled with warnings of danger. John ignored most of these warnings while preparing for the journey, thinking that courage and intelligence would protect him. Now, as he stepped closer to the village, the warnings became more real. Every sound of movement, every crack of a branch made him tense. The forest felt alive, watching him, testing him. When he finally reached the edge of the village, John was careful to remain calm and unthreatening. He stepped out of the trees slowly, raising his hand slightly in a gesture of peace. A few villagers spotted him immediately. They stopped their daily work, watching him with suspicion. Children peeked from behind their mothers, curious but cautious. A young warrior, tall and strong, stepped forward, signaling the others to remain alert. John remembered what he had learned from books. The first impression mattered. He smiled politely and spoke in the few words of Spanish he had learned from previous travelers, hoping to communicate that he came in peace. For a moment, there was silence. The villagers exchanged glances, and John realized that he had no idea what they truly understood or expected from him. His smile, his gestures, and his words were all meaningless unless he proved he could be trusted. Then, as if on cue, the warrior signaled others to surround him. John's heart skipped a beat. He tried to back up slowly, hoping that he could explain himself, but the villagers' expressions were firm and unyielding. Before he could speak further, two strong hands grabbed him by the arms. He was caught. Panic rose in John's chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I mean no harm," he exclaimed, his voice shaking slightly. "I only seek knowledge, maybe friendship." His words sounded weak, even to himself. The warrior holding him did not respond. Instead, he gestured to another elder in the village, a man with a stern face and eyes that seemed to pierce right through John's bravado. The elder's gaze made John feel small, like a child caught doing something he did not fully understand. The elder motioned for John to follow, and he was led into the center of the village. All work ceased as villagers watched the stranger. He noticed small details: women cooking in clay pots, children playing with simple toys, and men weaving baskets or carving tools from wood. It was a vibrant community, alive and self-sufficient. Yet John realized it was also tightly controlled. The people moved with purpose, and the smallest action could be misinterpreted as a threat. The elder spoke in a language John could not understand. The warrior translated slowly, "You are here without permission. You are an outsider. You must explain yourself." John swallowed hard, thinking quickly. He knew that boasting about treasure or wealth would only make things worse. He needed to show respect, humility, and honesty, even if he could not fully communicate his intentions. I come from far away," he said, keeping his voice steady. "I seek understanding. I wish to learn from you. I mean no harm." The warrior studied him carefully. John could feel the scrutiny of the entire village. Every glance, every movement seemed to weigh him. He realized that the people around him had lived their lives under strict codes, valuing trust, respect, and courage. His usual confidence felt fragile here. The warrior spoke to the elder, and after a long pause, the elder nodded. The elder's expression was unreadable, but John noticed that he was not dismissed immediately. There was still a chance, but he had crossed a threshold. He was no longer an observer. He was part of their world now, whether he wanted it or not. That evening, John was taken to a small hut at the edge of the village. It was modest but clean, with a mat for sleeping and a fire pit in the center. He was given some food, corn, beans, and dried meat, which he ate hungrily. Hunger had been his constant companion during the journey, and the simple meal tasted better than any feast he had imagined. Yet, he was painfully aware that he was a guest, and in a place like this, a guest could quickly become a prisoner. The days that followed were challenging. The villagers did not openly harm him, but they did not trust him either. He was assigned small tasks: carrying water from a nearby stream, gathering firewood and helping with chores. The work was exhausting, and John soon realized that surviving in this environment required more than strength. It required attention, patience, and respect. He had thought he could rely on intelligence and cleverness alone, but now he saw that the rules of this community were different. The village did not tolerate arrogance or greed. Every mistake could be dangerous. Among the villagers, one person drew John's attention the most. A woman who appeared older and wiser watched him quietly. She had been with the village for many years, though her story hinted at a life far from here before she arrived. Unlike the others, she did not speak directly to him at first, but she observed him, noting his strengths, his weaknesses, and his intentions. Over time, she became a reluctant guide, showing him how to carry water without spilling it, how to collect firewood safely, and how to move through the village without alarming the children or the elders. Through her guidance, John began to understand the deeper realities of life in the village. This was a community that had survived for generations, protecting its people and resources with strict rules and careful planning. They valued cooperation and mutual respect over individual ambition. The dream of gold and treasure he had carried for so long seemed trivial compared to the lessons he was learning: patience, humility, and understanding. He realized that wealth here was not measured in gold, but in knowledge, survival skills, and trust. One morning, John ventured a little farther than usual, curious to explore the surrounding forest. He thought he might find signs of the treasure or at least understand more about the land. As he walked quietly, he noticed tracks, footprints that did not belong to him or the village. His heart quickened. Could it be other outsiders, or perhaps hunters from a neighboring tribe? He knew he had to be careful. The forest was beautiful, but it was also full of dangers. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping branch, reminded him that he was no longer in the safety of his small town. When he returned to the village, he was stopped by the elder. The man spoke sternly, though John could not understand the words. The warrior who had initially captured him translated, "You cannot wander freely. The forest is not yours. The village protects you, but you must respect its boundaries." John nodded, realizing how naive he had been. He had assumed that bravery meant moving without caution, but here, respect and understanding were far more valuable. Every step he took without permission could have caused great harm. Over the next few weeks, John began to adapt. He learned how to start a fire with minimal resources, how to cook food in a way that preserved it for longer periods, and how to interact with villagers without causing offense. He learned that survival was not about force, but about observation and understanding. The woman who had guided him continued to mentor him, though she remained cautious. Sometimes she would scold him when he acted impulsively, but he appreciated her honesty. He realized that this guidance was more valuable than any gold he had imagined. Yet despite his progress, John could not shake the feeling that he was constantly under scrutiny. The villagers watched him, tested him, and spoke quietly among themselves about him. He understood that trust could not be demanded, it had to be earned. Every small task, every act of respect or patience, was a step toward gaining it. He began to see the truth of his situation. He was no longer just a traveler seeking fortune. He was living in a world with its own rules, and his survival depended entirely on adapting to them. John's ambition did not disappear, but it changed. He began to dream not only of wealth but of understanding, of surviving, and perhaps one day earning a place among the people who had initially captured him. He realized that the real challenge was not to claim treasure, but to navigate a world far different from anything he had known. Every day was a test, and every lesson learned brought him closer to understanding the village, its people, and the strength required to survive in their world. By the time the first month had passed, John felt a strange mix of fear, respect, and fascination. The initial excitement of adventure had transformed into a deeper understanding of life in the Apache village. He was no longer a visitor with dreams of gold. He was a student, learning lessons that could not be taught in books or learned on the road. And though he still hoped for fortune, he now realized that fortune might take a very different form than he had ever imagined. John Parker had spent weeks in the Apache village, learning to survive and adapt to a life far different from the one he had known. Every day brought new lessons. He learned how to carry water without spilling it, how to cook simple meals that would last, and how to move quietly through the village without alarming the children or elders. Slowly, he began to feel a strange sense of belonging, even as he remained painfully aware that he was still a captive. Trust was fragile here, and one wrong move could change everything. Despite the progress he had made, John could not ignore the reality of his situation. The village had accepted him temporarily, but acceptance was not the same as freedom. He was under constant observation, and every action was judged. The warriors watched him, the elders whispered among themselves, and even the children's curious eyes seemed to measure him. John began to understand that survival in this place required more than strength or intelligence. It required patience, humility, and the ability to read people. Each day was a delicate balance between learning and respecting boundaries, between showing courage and avoiding offense. One morning, the village was filled with unusual tension. The elders gathered in a circle, speaking in low, serious tones. John noticed that the usual calm atmosphere had shifted. He asked the woman who had guided him quietly, "What's happening?" She shook her head, her eyes serious. "A neighboring tribe is close. They might attack. The council is deciding what to do." John felt a chill run down his spine. He had read stories of tribal conflicts in books, but seeing it up close was different. This was not a story. This was real life, and danger was imminent. For the first time, John truly felt the vulnerability of his position. He was not a warrior, not a trained fighter. He was a stranger in a community that valued strength, skill, and loyalty. If the neighboring tribe attacked, he had no idea what role he could play, if any. Fear and doubt crept into his mind. Was he foolish to have come here? Had his desire for wealth clouded his judgment? The answers did not come easily. All he could do was prepare and hope that he could survive, even if it meant relying on the villagers to protect him. The council decided that John could stay within the village, but he would have to prove that he could be useful. He was assigned to help carry water, repair huts, and gather firewood, tasks that were physically demanding and required attention to detail. John worked harder than ever, not just out of necessity but out of determination to show that he could contribute. The woman who guided him watched him closely, offering advice and corrections. "Move carefully," she would say. "Your strength is not enough. You must think." Her words reminded him that survival was not about brute force. It was about observation, learning, and adapting. Despite the constant work, John's mind kept returning to the dream that had brought him here. He still imagined treasure, hidden gold, and the wealth he had sought. But now he began to realize that wealth might take a different form. Knowledge, skill, and trust were valuable too. He began to see the wisdom in the village's way of life. Their strength did not come from material possessions, but from cooperation, respect, and understanding. This realization both humbled and frustrated him. Humbling because he had underestimated the complexity of life here, frustrating because his original goal seemed further away than ever. Then one day, everything changed. A scout from the village returned with urgent news. The neighboring tribe had been spotted closer than expected, and there was a real threat of attack. The elders called for an emergency meeting, and John was brought in, unsure of what to expect. The warrior who had first captured him spoke directly to him. "You are not ready for battle," he said, "but you will stay with the village. You must follow every rule, every command, and understand that your life depends on obedience and respect." John nodded, his stomach tight with fear. He understood that disobedience could mean death. In the days that followed, tension in the village was palpable. Every sound in the forest, every rustle of leaves was met with alertness. John worked tirelessly, helping wherever he could. He carried water, repaired shelters, and even assisted in setting traps and barriers around the village. Each task was a lesson in patience and attention. He realized that survival was about more than physical strength. It was about understanding the environment and the people who lived in it. Mistakes could be costly, and he had to think carefully before acting. During this time, John developed a deeper bond with the woman who had been guiding him. She began to speak more openly to him, sharing stories of her own past. She had once been a captive in a different tribe, taken as a child, and forced to work in a household far from home. Over time, she had learned the ways of the people and gained respect, though she had never fully trusted outsiders again. Her story was a mirror to John's own situation, and he began to understand the complexity of life in a tribal society. Respect and trust were earned slowly, and freedom was a privilege, not a right. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned a soft orange, John reflected on his journey so far. He had come seeking treasure and adventure, expecting riches and glory. Instead, he had found a life of discipline, observation, and hard labor. The dreams of gold seemed distant, but he was learning something more profound: the value of patience, understanding, and humility. He realized that the village, with its strict rules and careful watchfulness, was teaching him lessons that no book or guide could provide. Survival was not about wealth. It was about wisdom and respect. However, John's transformation was not without struggle. There were moments when fear and frustration overwhelmed him. He missed his home, his family, and the familiar comforts of his old life. He resented the villagers at times, feeling trapped and powerless. Yet each day he learned something new: how to start a fire quickly, how to recognize edible plants, and how to read the subtle signals of the forest. These skills, small as they seemed, were life-saving. John began to understand that true strength was not in daring adventures or seeking gold, but in the ability to adapt and survive. The first major test of his courage came unexpectedly. A scout from the neighboring tribe had been spotted near the edge of the forest. The village prepared for a possible confrontation. John was terrified but determined to follow orders. He helped fortify the village, placing barriers and assisting in setting traps. Every step required careful thought. The villagers moved with precision, and John struggled to keep up. The fear was real, but so was his determination. He realized that survival depended not only on physical effort but on mental focus and discipline. During the tense days that followed, John observed the villagers closely. He saw their strength, their strategy, and their deep understanding of the land. They moved silently, communicated with subtle gestures, and knew the forest as if it were part of themselves. John admired their skills but also felt the weight of his own limitations. He was still a stranger, still vulnerable, and still dependent on their guidance. Yet he worked tirelessly, driven by a desire not just to survive, but to prove that he could be useful, that he could earn some measure of respect. Through these experiences, John began to change. His dreams of gold and treasure faded slightly, replaced by a deeper appreciation for knowledge, skill, and connection. He realized that the true value of the village was not in material wealth but in the lessons it offered: patience, courage, respect, and resilience. Each day was a struggle, each task a challenge, but each success brought a sense of accomplishment he had never known. He began to understand that the treasure he sought might not be gold, but the wisdom and strength he gained in surviving and adapting. By the end of the month, John had faced his first real tests of courage and endurance. He had survived the initial threat of the neighboring tribe, learned the rules of the village, and begun to earn the cautious respect of some villagers. He had also discovered the depth of his own resilience, understanding that bravery was not just about seeking wealth or adventure, but about confronting fear, respecting others, and learning to adapt. The journey had already changed him, and he knew that the challenges ahead would demand even more strength, wisdom, and humility. John Parker, once a young man driven by dreams of gold and glory, was beginning to understand that survival, trust, and respect were treasures in their own right. The village, the people, and the forest had become his teachers. And though the dream of fortune still lingered in the back of his mind, he knew that the path forward required patience, observation, and courage far greater than he had ever imagined. John Parker had survived the first threat from the neighboring tribe, and with each passing day, he began to feel a small sense of confidence. The fear that had gripped him during the initial weeks in the Apache village was slowly giving way to understanding and skill. He had learned how to move quietly through the forest, how to carry out tasks efficiently, and most importantly, how to observe and interpret the villagers' subtle signals. He was no longer a helpless stranger. He was slowly becoming a participant in the life of the community. The woman who had guided him from the beginning noticed this change. One morning, she approached him quietly as he gathered water from the stream. "You have learned much," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But learning is not enough. You must also understand why. The land, the people, the rules, they are all connected. You cannot survive by skill alone. You must respect them fully." John listened carefully, realizing that her words carried a deeper truth. His previous focus on treasure and personal ambition had blinded him to the complexity of life here. Now, he began to see that survival required humility, patience, and understanding beyond physical strength or cleverness. Days passed, and a small sense of routine began to settle over John's life. He woke with the sun, helped with chores, observed the elders and warriors, and learned the customs and rules of the village. Every task, no matter how small, was an opportunity to gain knowledge. He watched how the villagers treated one another, how they communicated without words, and how respect was shown not through wealth or power, but through careful action and consideration. This realization gradually shifted his perspective. Wealth, which had once been his sole motivation, now seemed shallow compared to the wisdom he was gaining. Then, a new challenge arrived that would test him in ways he had not anticipated. A serious illness struck one of the children in the village. The child's condition worried the elders, and everyone had to contribute to care and protection. John, despite his limited knowledge of medicine or healing, was assigned to assist. He helped gather herbs, prepare simple treatments, and stay by the child's side to ensure warmth and comfort. The work was exhausting and emotionally draining. Seeing the fear and concern of the family members reminded him that life here was fragile and precious. Every action mattered, and mistakes could have serious consequences. Through this experience, John began to understand a new kind of responsibility. His actions affected not just himself but the entire community. He realized that trust was fragile and had to be maintained through consistency, effort, and care. The woman who guided him helped him understand the medicinal properties of plants and herbs, teaching him how to mix them, how to observe symptoms, and how to act with caution. John worked tirelessly, learning quickly and applying the knowledge with care. For the first time, he felt a genuine sense of purpose beyond his original desire for wealth. One evening, as the child's condition improved, John sat outside the hut, reflecting on how far he had come. He thought about the dreams of gold and fortune that had driven him into the wilderness. They still existed, but they seemed distant and almost naive compared to the challenges he had faced. The treasure he had sought was nothing compared to the lessons he was learning: courage, patience, adaptability, and respect. He realized that life here demanded more than physical strength. It demanded emotional intelligence, empathy, and understanding of people and their ways. The turning point came when a serious dispute arose between the village and another nearby tribe. Tensions escalated quickly, and the elders debated how to respond. John was not directly involved, but he was expected to follow orders and assist wherever needed. For the first time, he witnessed the full complexity of tribal diplomacy, strategy, and defense. He saw how respect and trust could prevent violence, and how missteps could escalate conflicts quickly. The elders relied on careful observation, wise counsel, and coordinated action rather than brute force. John realized that courage was not about fighting, but about understanding, planning, and acting thoughtfully under pressure. As preparations continued, John's relationship with the guiding woman deepened. She taught him not only survival skills but also the values and wisdom of the village. "You have changed," she told him one day. "You are learning to see beyond yourself. That is the true measure of strength." Her words resonated deeply. He understood that his earlier arrogance, his obsession with gold, and his belief that cleverness alone could ensure success were naive. True strength, he realized, came from humility, perseverance, and respect for life in all its forms. John's new perspective was tested when a sudden emergency arose. A young warrior had been injured while hunting, and the village needed all available hands to assist. John joined the effort, carefully following instructions, helping carry supplies, and observing how the elders coordinated treatment. His efforts were clumsy at first, but he learned quickly. The warrior survived, thanks to the teamwork and careful attention of the villagers. For John, this was a critical moment. He saw how cooperation, respect, and shared responsibility could save lives, and he felt a growing sense of belonging. Over the following weeks, John became more integrated into the village life. He no longer saw himself solely as an outsider or a captive. He contributed to daily chores, assisted in minor construction projects, and helped care for the young and elderly. His presence was no longer a source of concern, though full trust was still a distant goal. The villagers observed him, tested his judgment, and slowly acknowledged his efforts. John began to feel pride in his ability to adapt, to learn, and to survive in this challenging environment. Yet, even as he adapted, the lessons of humility remained constant. John learned that life in the village was unpredictable. Weather could destroy crops, illness could strike unexpectedly, and conflicts could arise without warning. He understood that wealth or personal ambition could not protect him. True security came from skill, respect, and community. He began to see the wisdom in the village's traditions, realizing that these practices had been refined over generations to ensure survival, harmony, and resilience. One afternoon, John was asked to accompany the woman on a task outside the village. They had to gather specific herbs deep in the forest, a dangerous area known for wild animals and treacherous terrain. John felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He knew that success would demonstrate his growing competence and earn further trust. He followed her carefully, observing her movements, noting her knowledge of the forest, and learning to anticipate potential hazards. The journey was physically demanding and mentally challenging, but John felt a sense of accomplishment that far surpassed anything he had imagined when seeking gold. During the task, they encountered a small group of wild animals blocking their path. The woman calmly guided John, showing him how to move quietly, avoid provoking the animals, and find a safe route. John was amazed by her skill and composure. He realized that true courage was not recklessness, but careful action guided by knowledge and respect. The encounter strengthened his understanding of the values that had governed the village for generations: patience, observation, and strategic thinking. When they returned to the village, John felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. The elders acknowledged his effort, and some of the younger villagers began to see him as more than a stranger. For the first time, he felt a genuine connection to this community. His dreams of treasure and gold had not disappeared, but they had been transformed. He now understood that the real treasure was knowledge, skill, and the ability to survive and contribute to a community that valued respect and cooperation above all else. As the days turned into weeks, John reflected on his journey. He had come seeking wealth and adventure, expecting to claim treasure and glory. Instead, he had found challenges that tested his courage, patience, and understanding. He had learned to survive in a harsh and unfamiliar environment, to earn the cautious respect of the villagers, and to appreciate the value of humility, observation, and cooperation. The woman who guided him remained a mentor, a teacher, and a symbol of the wisdom he had come to admire. John Parker's transformation was now evident even to himself. He was no longer the young man driven solely by dreams of wealth and recognition. He had learned that true strength lay in understanding, respect, and perseverance. His original goal had been replaced by a deeper, more meaningful pursuit, becoming a person capable of surviving, adapting, and contributing to a world far different from the one he had known. The village, its people, and the lessons they offered had become the most valuable treasure he could imagine. Time had passed, and John Parker was no longer the same young man who had entered the Apache village months before. The journey he had undertaken, which began with dreams of gold and fortune, had transformed into a journey of understanding, patience, and respect. He had learned the ways of the village, the forest, and the people who had initially captured him. He had endured fear, hardship, and uncertainty, and in the process he had discovered strengths and abilities within himself that he never knew existed. Despite the growth he had achieved, John could not ignore the lingering thought of the treasure that had first drawn him to this remote place. Although he had come to appreciate the knowledge, skills, and relationships he had gained, the idea of wealth still tugged at the edge of his mind. He wondered if there might be a way to reconcile his original dream with the lessons he had learned. Yet he also understood that any attempt to take treasure without respect for the village's rules and culture could have dire consequences. The warnings he had received months ago were no longer abstract. They were real, and he knew that even a single mistake could cost him his life. One morning, the elders called for a council meeting in the center of the village. John was summoned, a sign that his presence and actions had gained the attention of the leadership. He entered the circle with care, bowing slightly to show respect. The elder who had first questioned him spoke, and the warrior who translated for John conveyed the message. "Your time here has shown patience and courage. You have learned much, but your place among us is still not certain. You must prove your loyalty and understanding before you are fully trusted." John nodded solemnly, realizing that this was the final test of his journey so far. The test was unlike anything John had faced before. A group of villagers had discovered signs of outsiders approaching the village, travelers who might bring danger or conflict. The elders decided to send John along with a small team to investigate and report back, assessing whether the newcomers posed a threat. For John, this was both an opportunity and a challenge. He would have to use everything he had learned: observation, patience, respect, and courage. Failure was not an option, and success could finally earn him a place of trust in the village. As he traveled with the small team, John's skills were put to the test immediately. He observed footprints in the dirt, noted the condition of the forest, and listened carefully to the sounds around him. Every rustle of leaves, every movement of animals, and every change in the wind carried meaning. The team relied on him to provide insight, and John realized that his training in observation and patience was now paying off. He felt a sense of pride mixed with tension, knowing that the safety of the village, and perhaps his own life, depended on his judgment and actions. During the investigation, the group encountered signs that the travelers were friendly and not a threat. John used his understanding of the villagers, way of thinking to suggest safe ways to approach and communicate. His recommendations were accepted, and the villagers successfully made contact without conflict. This moment was a turning point for John. He felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not because of treasure or wealth, but because he had contributed to the safety and harmony of the village. For the first time, he realized that his true value was measured not in gold, but in his actions, decisions, and respect for others. Upon returning to the village, the elders acknowledged John's efforts. They praised his observation skills, careful judgment, and courage under pressure. For John, it was a moment of quiet triumph. He had not only survived in this harsh and unfamiliar environment, but had also proven that he could act responsibly, think strategically, and contribute meaningfully. The woman who had guided him from the beginning smiled, her eyes showing approval and pride. "You have learned much," she said simply. "The lessons are yours if you continue to respect them." With this success, John faced the next important decision in his journey, whether to remain in the village or return to the world he had left behind. The treasure he had sought still lingered in his imagination, but he now understood that any attempt to claim it recklessly would be dangerous and selfish. Staying in the village offered safety, belonging, and the continued opportunity to learn and grow. Leaving promised freedom and a return to his former ambitions, but carried uncertainty and risk. He reflected on the months he had spent here, the hardships he had endured, and the lessons he had learned about patience, courage, and respect. After long consideration, John decided to speak with the elder who had first tested him. He expressed his gratitude for the lessons and guidance he had received. He asked for permission to leave, explaining that while he had grown and learned much, he needed to return to his own life. The elder listened carefully, then nodded. Through the warrior who translated, the message was clear. John was free to leave, but the village's warnings remained. "Return without understanding, and you will not be safe," the translation cautioned. John accepted the warning, knowing that respect and humility must guide his actions in the world beyond the village. Before departing, John took a moment to reflect on the woman who had mentored him. She had been a constant presence, a guide, and a teacher of both survival and wisdom. She had shown him the value of patience, observation, and respect, and her lessons would remain with him for the rest of his life. John thanked her sincerely, promising to carry the knowledge and understanding he had gained. She nodded, acknowledging his growth and the sincerity of his words. For John, this farewell was bittersweet. He had found mentors, friends, and a community in the most unexpected place, but now he had to face the unknown once more. As John left the village, he felt a mixture of emotions. He had survived months of uncertainty, learned skills that had once seemed impossible, and grown in ways he could never have imagined. The forest that had once seemed threatening now felt familiar, a place where he had proven his courage and resilience. Each step away from the village was a reminder of both the lessons he had learned and the challenges he had overcome. He understood that the journey had changed him fundamentally. He was no longer just a dreamer seeking fortune, but a man tempered by experience, knowledge, and respect. The path back through the wilderness was challenging but different this time. John moved with confidence, applying the skills he had learned. He identified safe sources of water, recognized edible plants, and navigated the terrain with an awareness that would have seemed impossible at the beginning of his journey. He reflected on how much he had grown, not only in skill but in character. He understood that the world outside the village was vast and unpredictable, and that his survival depended on continued caution, respect, and intelligence. During his journey, John also thought about the treasure he had originally sought. He realized that wealth, in the form he had imagined, was not nearly as valuable as the wisdom he now carried. The knowledge of survival, the understanding of respect and community, and the ability to navigate challenges with patience and courage were treasures far greater than gold. He knew that these lessons would guide him for the rest of his life, no matter where he went or what he faced. Finally, John reached the edge of the forest and the first signs of civilization beyond the wilderness. His heart swelled with a sense of accomplishment and relief. He had faced fear, hardship, and uncertainty. He had been captured, tested, and challenged in ways he could never have anticipated. And through it all, he had grown, not just as a survivor, but as a person capable of understanding, respecting, and adapting to the world around him. John's return to his hometown was quiet but meaningful. People noticed that he had changed. There was a maturity, a calm confidence in his presence that had not been there before. He spoke less of gold and riches and more of experience, resilience, and the lessons he had learned from the Apache village. His family listened in awe as he recounted the challenges, the teachings, and the transformations he had undergone. John understood that the wealth he had originally sought was never about material gain, but about the knowledge, wisdom, and growth he had earned through his journey. Though John never claimed treasure from the village, he returned with something far more valuable. He carried the understanding that life's true rewards often come from challenge, learning, and respect for others. The experience had changed him fundamentally, and he knew that the lessons would guide his future decisions, relationships, and adventures. He had begun as a young man driven by ambition and desire for wealth, but he returned as someone tempered by experience, humility, and a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to live. In the years that followed, John shared his story with others, not to boast of treasure or fortune, but to teach the value of courage, patience, respect, and adaptation. He became known not for wealth but for wisdom and resilience. And every time he thought back to the village, the woman who guided him, and the challenges he had faced, he realized that the true treasure of his journey had been the transformation of himself, a treasure that no gold could ever replace.